It's 4 o'clock, so we're gonna go ahead and get started. Chanlin, can you hear us okay? Still?
Yes, we can hear you well. So.
Okay, thanks. Um, so I asked Jeff Peterson to come across the parking lot and give us just an overview of the Water Resources Center. I feel like the WRS grad program and the Water Resources Center like have a family relationship, but I thought especially for the incoming grad student class, it's really helpful to have Jeff come and kind of outline what the center is, what our relationship is, and really what are the opportunities, because you do have a lot of really impactful opportunities for students.
Well, great. Thank you. Everybody hearing and seeing me okay in Duluth? Very good.
Yes.
Well, thank you all for coming. Good to see you all. I saw some of you last week, just last week at the Water Resources Conference. So good to see you again. And yeah, when Diana mentioned this, I thought, yeah, this would be a good idea. I remember in 2015, when I had just taken this job and moved to Minnesota, I did a similar thing, came to the WRS seminar, but then it was like, who is this guy, Jeff, and why is he here, and what does he plan to do? And so this is, and a lot, and I went back and I still, being a digital pack rat, I still had the slides from that presentation, so I went back and looked at it, and I realized, well, a lot indeed has happened since then, so this is a good chance just for that update, in case, I don't know if there's anybody here who happens to even remember that. But more importantly, you're all, most of the audience here, as Dana said, are first year students. You may be vaguely familiar with the Water Resources Center and some of the things we do. Know we have a relationship to WRS, but it's a good chance for me to be able to talk to you and tell you a little bit more about the center. Let's see here. Okay. Thought my computer might have been frozen there a little bit. So just a kind of an overview of what I'll talk about. I'll start with answering some of the basic questions, I guess. Who in the world are these people? Why are we even here, the Water Resources Center? In the course of that, I'll give you a brief history of the WRC. I won't belabor that, but it turns out that this year and this week, in fact, is a fortuitous time to be talking about our history. So I'll get to some of that. And then we'll get into what we look like today, our current structure, the various affiliations we have on and off campus, current vision and mission. So answering the why or why we're doing what we're doing question, and talk a little bit about our staff. And that will segue into the next question, what we do. A couple of ways to answer that question. First is what we do by function, meaning what kind of we do in the realm of research, what we do in the realm of extension, engagement, outreach, and also instruction. Another way to answer that question is what kind of topics we work on within this broad scope of water resource issues, which we all know is indeed very broad. And in the course of that, it won't be comprehensive, but I'll just pick out some examples of some of our programs within the center, things that we work on, and trying to pick out a few where that might be of interest to WRS students and or faculty, because they may work on topics that you're interested in, and we'll give you some connections to people who are working on those topics, but also some of them do have opportunities for students to do, already involve students in some cases and have opportunities for students. And then I'll end with some more specific things about how you might be involved in what we do. So, starting with a history. It turns out that this year we're celebrating or observing anyway, our 60th anniversary. So the history of our center can be traced back to the passage of this thing called the Water Resources Research Act, signed into law by President Lyndon Johnson at the time, July 1964. And what that act did is authorized federal funding to go to all 50 states, specifically to the land grant institutions in all 50 states, to create what they called Water Resources Research Center Institute or equivalent agency, which is just a Water Institute for short in the rest of the act. And then in his signing statement, I won't read the whole thing there, but Johnson, I'm sure it was his staff who wrote it, but it's his signature on the document, talking about what the purpose was bringing in the expertise and the intellectual power of universities to network themselves together and address all these different water resources issues. And it was very purposefully set up so that it was like a sort of a cost sharing program. So for every federal dollar that these centers and institutes get, they also have to come up with a certain number of non-federal dollars, sometimes provided by the university, but elsewhere. And that sort of makes sure that you have skin in the game to embed what you're doing within your own state. And that all that basic structure remains true today. This all passed in 1964. And then all the land-grant universities in the rest of the summer and the early fall of that year, including here at the University of Minnesota, found out this had happened. I'm sure they were tracking it. But they realized that, oh, we can get federal money if we want to set up a water institute. And there's only one right answer to that question, I guess, if you're a university administrator. So it turns out that I didn't realize this till I was putting these slides together, but 60 years ago, this week, 60 years ago, Saturday, the University of Minnesota, the president's office, put out this press release announcing that they have created a water resources research center. So I guess it's happy birthday to us right now. So this press release, it did generate some press. The good people at the University of Minnesota libraries, by the way, pro tip, if anybody hasn't told you, if you need help finding stuff, talk to a librarian. They're great. The whole reason they exist is to help you basically find what you need. And the good people, the good librarians here, were just unknown to us. We're just tracking all this, and every time they ran across like a news release or anything relevant to the Water Resources Center, they put it away in a file. And 60 years later, they had this whole box of files, and we knew the 60th anniversary was coming, so we reached out to the library to say, do you have anything in your archives about the history of the center? And they basically said, oh my God, we're so excited, we've been waiting for this day. Not really. They pulled out the box and we could look at it, and there's all kinds of there's photos of me just delighting and reading all this old stuff. So anyway, so this is one of the documents we pulled out, and the press release laid out the various things that the Water Resources Center Research Center was going to do. First and foremost, it would be administering research support, these federal funds, matched with state funds, administer the terms of the act, the new act. And then the rest of this thing kind of flowed from the language in the act itself. So integrating, coordinating research, stimulating expansion of research on water problems relevant to Minnesota, training scientists, and then coordinating within the state. And those things remain true today. So we're still working on all those. Our mission, I would say, has broadened out from that over time, and we'll talk more about some of the developments in history. So this gives us one of our sets of affiliations that we have to this day. We're still a member of this network of water resources research institutes across the country. In most cases, but not all, they're located at the land-grant university in respective states. There's a couple of exceptions. Over time, the federal law had been broadened so that these institutes could also be set up in U.S. territories. So there's 54 altogether, 50 states, plus the District of Columbia, and then Guam, Puerto Rico, and the Virgin Islands. We are organized into, so there's still the Federal Water Resources Research Act program, which these days is administered by USGS, U.S. Geological Survey. So they still operate that program, and the money funnels from USGS to us, and then to PIs who might be working on research. These 54 institutes are also organized, have their own association, basically. So there's this nonprofit organization called NIWAR, the National Institutes for Water Resources, which is an organization, it's distinct from the federal program, but in practice, we work really closely with them. So you might just hear those acronyms flying around, and a lot of people are confused about the distinction. Okay, so the Water Resources Research Center operated under that name, under the mission that was laid out in the press release for about 30 years, 1964 to 1996. And then, as I'll talk about in a minute, there was like a merger of centers in the mid-90s that changed the name. But in those first 3 decades, it reported to the graduate school. So the director of that center reported to the dean of the graduate school, kind of reflecting how broadly interdisciplinary water research is. The main focus really was administering the Water Resources Research Act and distributing research funds, but the center also created some outreach efforts over time. So if you can see on the slide here, this is from the library archives, one of the earliest conferences they hosted in 1967. And the newsletter that was started in, I think sometime in the 1980s, was called Minigram, and this happens to be an issue from like the early 1990s. I had to put this guy in here. This is the first logo of the very earliest issues of the Minigram. I don't know if you can make it out, but this is like this water droplet guy typing on a manual typewriter, so you can tell how long ago that was. At least by the 1990s, I think this was produced on a computer, but Minigram, it was Pat Brzonek, who was one of the director in the 1980s, came up with this title, I'm told, that Mini from the state of Minnesota is a Dakota word meaning water. Gram is a Latin root meaning word. So this, if you put the mashup of the 2 languages together, this means water word, or the word on water, maybe more colloquially. So that was the Water Resources Research Center. And then the next set of developments happened in the 1990s. So, as we all know, water looms large in Minnesota. There's lots of issues, lots of water bodies, lots of things to study. And over time, it's still the case at the University of Minnesota, there's lots of programs and centers and things popping up studying water. And it had gotten to, there was a proliferation of these programs and centers over that period of time. And by the 1990s, there was concern that we had too many kind of smallish water resources centers that were not coordinating with each other. They might be duplicating with each other. So there was a task force assembled to discuss all this. One of the recommendations was to merge at least some of the smaller programs together into more cohesive units. So there was, one of the recommendations was to merge or at least co-locate the Water Resources Research Center with some other programs. And after a period of discussion in 1996, that happened. The new co-located unit is the name we still have, Water Resources Center. At the time, when I go back to read these documents, though, it wasn't really envisioned to be a single unified organization. It was more like a centralized hub where all these programs were co-located. They shared some staff, there was some coordination, but there was even language in the earliest announcement that said all the programs would operate autonomously within the context of their current missions. So this was the programs that were merged together with the Water Resources Research Center. By the 1990s, that had moved from the graduate school to what was then the College of Natural Resources. Extension, Water Quality Program was another one, as part of University of Minnesota Extension. And then the Center for Agricultural Impacts on Water Quality at that time was part of the College of Agriculture. So this was an agreement of the respective deans to put all these things together under one roof, as it were. And later on that was before I got here, but I don't know, following the the financial crisis and the Great Recession and budget cuts and things, College of Natural Resources and the College of Agriculture merged into what we now call CFANS, College of Food, Agriculture, and Natural Resource Sciences. So the Water Resources Center sort of inherited the merged nature of its parent units. And to this day, we still have these other affiliations. So I report, as director, I report to the Dean of University of Minnesota Extension, Bev Durkin, and the Dean of CFANS, Brian Burr. I have two bosses, which is always an interesting feature of one's job, but I have to say what makes it work well for us is that they're in pretty close agreement on what we should be doing. So I have no complaints about how it's worked out. So this is what I call our highly simplified org chart. They both invest some operating funds into the center, and of course, in turn, we're contributing to the missions of those larger units. But I will say we work pretty broadly across the entire institution, across the whole University of Minnesota system. So going back to what happened after the merger, everything was co-located, and they did cooperate on a number of things. Newsletter, they hosted a flagship conference, which is the ancestor of the one some of you went to last week. But functionally speaking, it was led by two co-directors who oversaw their respective programmatic domains, and it basically functioned as two centers under one umbrella. Fast forward through time, in the mid 20-teens and about 2014, one of the co-directors, Deb Swackhammer at the time, was announced her retirement. You might have heard of Deb Swackhammer in addition to being co-director of the Water Resource Center. She's well known for many other accomplishments. And the other co-director at the time was Faye Sleeper. She was getting closer to retirement. So the two deans, actually to this day, the same deans, Bev and Brian of the two colleges, said that, you know, this is an opportunity. When we rehire, we're going to change the leadership structure so that we have a single director of the whole center who will work with an associate director. So the goal was to create a more unified, you know, sort of seamless, cohesive organization. So when I was hired, that was sort of one of my goals, and that's one of the things that we've been working on together over the last, with the staff over the last 10 years or so. We didn't have a center-wide strategic plan when I started, so that was one of the first things we did. There was a strategic plan released in like 2017, and just now, earlier this year, we released the next version or an update to that strategic plan. So this is the most up-to-date vision and mission statements. How am I doing on time? I'm probably going a little long here. So the vision, clean and abundant water for all, is pretty broad, pretty ambitious. Indeed, so ambitious that there's no way that one center could ever accomplish that vision. We discussed this for a long time, and we agree that that's definitely true. There's a lot of people, a lot of players who would have to be involved to work toward that mission. We're just one small slice of the pie, as it were. But it remains the case that when we really ask ourselves, you know, and we had a lot of discussions with the staff, like what's the reason we exist underlying everything we do? What's the motivation for doing what we do? That's what we're working toward. And another way to put it is that if we did reach a state of the world where everybody agreed there was clean and abundant water for all, probably we can all happily retire. And then the mission is, so the vision is more the why statements, why do we exist? Mission is more the how we do our work and what we actually work on. Being at a university, we're focused on research, public university especially, and a land-grant university more specifically, we inherit this mission, right? We do research, we do extension, engagement, outreach, and we do education and instruction. I won't go through them all, but the staff also identified our core values, which you can find in the strategic plan, kind of like where we ended up on those. I'll talk about it a little bit later, but one of the other things we did in the first strategic plan that was released in 2017 is we identified where we think our unique expertise lies and where we're going to focus our efforts. Huge spectrum of water issues to work on. We're by no means the only program working on water in the University of Minnesota or in Minnesota more broadly. So we asked ourselves a question: what is our unique contribution here, and what are we going to focus on? Where can we make the biggest impact? So I'll come back to that in a little bit later. So this is our current staff. I think there's 28 faces, some of them hidden behind Goldie Gopher there. That mostly reflects the fact that some of these are open positions that we're working to fill right now. 28, I think, circles in that staff. One of the things that's happened is we've become a little bit more unified and cohesive and working together as the center's actually grown. So we've got more programs, we've got more budget, have attracted some more funding. So this is about roughly double the size of the center when I started, I guess. So I won't go through all the names here, but I just wanted to show you this. So first of all, you see some of the faces and at least get a glimpse of the names in case you run across some of us, maybe you already have. One way we could divide this up is to identify the type of work we all do. So as I mentioned, leadership is myself and Joel Larson, who's our associate director. And then we've got several folks reporting to either Joel or me who manage and coordinate the programs within the center. So Tracy, you see there, is the graduate program coordinator, of course, for WRS. So that's our link to her. She helps us in the center too with some organizing some events and works on the conference and things like that. Dan Wheeler manages our on-site sewage treatment program, which I'll talk about later. John Bellata manages our stormwater program, which I'll also talk about. Sarah Roth manages the Water Resources Research Act program. It's still that following that lineage, that's still an active program. And then Marcel Lewandowski manages our Minnesota Office for Soil Health. And then another group of folks are in our main office providing administrative support and communications. Jody Ron is our finance professional, providing all these core functions to all the different programs. And then the rest of the folks here are researchers and educators are actually conducting all the programs. So you see quite a few people have the title Extension Educator. So that collectively they make up what's called the Extension Water Resources Program Teams. University of Minnesota Extension is divided into these program teams by discipline or subject matter. So, and that is also a growing team. We just hired Tim Gisecki, who's going to be working on, who's going to be working on ag water quality and groundwater and irrigation issues. So he starts at the end of the month. Got an open position that I think is going to be filled soon, working on private wells in particular, educating owners of private wells. And then let's see, there's also an open position right now for an extension educator to work on stormwater, urban stormwater. Okay, so that's one way you can divide up our staff. Another way to do it that kind of better reflects what I was talking about, how we're trying to be integrated and cohesive, is I'm just going to show you a few slides here about the people who are involved in a few of the various programs I'm going to talk about. So the Water Resources Research Act program, Sarah manages it, but a lot of us are involved in one way or another. You'll see some of the same faces pop up here. managing the stormwater research program, which I'll talk about. And then Marcel Lewandowski manages Minnesota Office for Soil Health. There's another set of people, but overlapping with who I talked about, managing that program. And then the on-site sewage treatment program will also fill you in on a little bit. So the point of this is that we've got cohesion within the center in the sense that there's a lot of the same people working, collaborating together, working on multiple programs. Okay, so I guess that's getting to be a segue now into answering we talked about who we are, why we're here part. I want to get a little bit more into what we do. And I'll first answer that question by talking about the various land grant functions we work on. So the first piece of the puzzle, I guess, is research. First piece I'm going to talk about anyway. And we work on research in kind of from two directions. I always say we work on both sides of the ledger here. So one way, and a really common way we work on research or contribute to research is that we act as the sponsor. So we, through the Water Resources Research Act funds, through the Stormwater Program, which I'll talk about, and other things, we issue a request for proposals. Researchers like Diana and like Chan Lan have both applied to these programs. The applicants apply, we have a review panel put together, they screen them, and we rank and review them, and then award the top ranked projects. So a lot of what's on our books budget-wise research, a lot of it is that we're distributing funds through these competitive processes. And a lot of those projects, most I would say, involve graduate students. So maybe some of you know, maybe some of you don't even know that projects you're working on were funded through one of these WRC mechanisms. So that's research where we act as a sponsor. The other way we're involved in research is where we bring teams we perform this sort of coordinating role sometimes, a lot of times actually, bring groups of faculty and researchers together who have common interests, but often an interdisciplinary team, and they together, often with our help, apply to funds from an external funding agency like National Science Foundation or USDA or EPA or something like that. And so there's quite a few projects also on our books where we've been successful with these teams in getting grant funds awarded. And sometimes our researchers within the WRC are involved in those projects. Very often we play kind of a coordinating role. These tend to be kind of large, multi-departmental, complex projects. So it's helpful to have somebody who can coordinate that and provide that role too. Another big piece of the puzzle, of course, here is engagement. That's a broad term for extension, outreach, and all of these things that reach outside the university in various ways. So all the extension educators and the work that they do fit in that bucket. We also have this professional training type programs. So I mentioned on-site sewage treatment program. I'll delve into a little bit more. They do a lot of work in that area. Watershed specialist training is another one. And then some of the events that we sponsor also fit in this bucket. So the example from last week, Minnesota Water Resources Conference, probably the best known one that attracts the biggest single audience, but there are others too. Minnesota Stormwater Seminar Series is one example we'll talk about. Third piece is education or instruction, and our main connection there are you all, the Water Resources Science Graduate Program. The history of the Water Resources Center as it currently exists and is named from the 1990s is very tightly intertwined with the creation of the Water Resources Science Program. That our center under its current name and the WRS program were created at about the same time in the mid-1990s. Pat Brzonek, who was the co-director of the Water Resources Center at the time, was also the director of graduate studies for WRS, so there was all that relationship, and that,
So you could be DGS, Jeff.
well, except that the deans in their wisdom, if you wanna call it that, decided not to put that bullet point in the, in the PD when I was hired, so that has actually come up, but, anyway, so, but that has happened historically, anyway. And so that we have that historic tie, and we're you know, Tracy is officed in the WRC. We work with her closely, and we have that sort of familial relationship. But beyond that, we try to offer various support for WRS students and faculty. We funded graduate research assistantships that are targeted specifically to WRS students, as well as fellowships, and we offer professional development as well. So we talked about that too. So let me back up for a moment. These three pieces, research, engagement, and education, that we sort of summarize the tripartite mission of public university, land-grant university like the University of Minnesota, Twin Cities. But, and a lot of academic units, you know, academic departments, I think most of their work is probably encapsulated or well described by those three categories. As an interdisciplinary center or institute, I always feel like we have sort of an additional function, is that we're meant to be a connector and an integrator, both on campus and connecting the on-campus community with the off-campus community. So I never know quite how to describe what I call this fourth function, but there's multiple descriptors, I guess. One is we're a connector, we're an integrator, but we also work a lot on communication. So we have newsletters that I'll talk about a little bit. We have pretty active social media presence and sort of cultivate a broad audience of folks, both on campus but also off campus, who are interested in water resources. And it gives us sort of a ready audience to get the word out about what's going on here at the university to those folks. So we have communications folks working in that area, also doing social media. And then for the on-campus connections, we've done various things. We have hosted Headwaters. We have this series called the Headwaters Lecture Series, where we try to bring prominent speakers to campus who are, can interact with students and faculty. We should maybe talk about inviting another Headwaters lecturer here soon. We've hosted various kinds of symposia on different topics to try to bring people together of common interests. Okay, so now the other way to answer the what we do question is talking about the topics that we work on. So this goes back to this 2017 strategic plan, where we did a fair bit of work, partly introspective. So really asking ourselves with our staff at the time, where do we think we have our expertise and what we're doing, and where do we want to build expertise where we think we could go to make a difference? And then also connecting with the broader community here on campus, but also around the state, asking them, you know, where they see us having the greatest impact. And from those discussions, where we came out of that was that basically all the problems that we work on are in this intersection of land, water, and people. So they're the sort of subset of water problems that are really tightly connected to land use and land management, but also connected broadly to people or individual decision-making is another way to describe it. So if you have a landscape like a watershed with a lot of individual property owners making decisions that collectively are going to have an impact on a water body, that's kind of the water issue that's home base for us. So non-point source pollution, for instance, fits well within that, but also things like, could be groundwater impacts, groundwater depletion in some cases, changes in stream flow, things like that. So that's still a fairly sizable subset of problems. So within that intersection, we identified 5 focus areas where we think we have expertise and where we want to build programs. So the top three are urban stormwater, water and agricultural landscapes, and decentralized wastewater. Decentralized wastewater is another term for septic systems. All of those, we have programs in all three. I'm going to talk about them. You could think of all of those three as sort of flows of water that fit that description I was just talking about, right? And then the other two focus areas are the ways in which those flows impact water bodies and their ultimate uses. So drinking water and aquatic ecosystems, lakes and aquatic ecosystems. In the most recent strategic plan, one addition we made to this is that that doesn't quite fully capture our expertise, because we have a lot of people in our center who have sort of cross-cutting knowledge where they work on problems in all those different buckets, or at least several of them. So, for instance, I'm an economist by training, and sometimes there's a reason for an economist to be working on any of those problems, right? And we also have social scientists working on it. So one area of cross-cutting expertise is social science, economics, and policy. Another one is watershed science and planning. Another one where we have people, particularly our Associate Director, Joel Larson, working a lot on is team science, or the science of team science, maybe. There is a literature on that that's emerging and is really valuable to draw from on what we do. And then water informatics and big data and things is another emerging area that cuts across all those. So now what I'll do, I'm just going to pick out a few programs. Again, this will not be comprehensive, but just I'm pulling out a few where I thought there might be overlap in some of your interests, and some of these do involve students in a pretty big way and create opportunities. So the first one is the stormwater research, Minnesota Stormwater Research Program. I guess you can't quite see it because of the way Zoom is situated there. That program is administered by the Water Resources Center, but it's funded by an appropriation through the Clean Water Fund. And if you're new to Minnesota, you may or may not be familiar with that. There was a constitutional amendment that passed back in 2008 that allocated an increment of sales taxes. So every time you buy something in Minnesota, there's a little slice of sales taxes that gets dumped into this Clean Water Land and Legacy set of funds. And one of those funds is the Clean Water Fund that ultimately the legislature has a final word on how they appropriate that. And we've gotten an appropriation to fund this stormwater research program through that. So it's also funded in part by contributions from cities, watershed districts, and some private entities also who have an interest in this. And the idea is that they can all collectively benefit from seeing the results of research. So the bigger the pool of research, the more research results that they'll all get. And over time, they have actually increased their contributions, so it's a nice way to leverage the state appropriation. They are organized into this entity called the Minnesota Stormwater Research Council. And so our program is administered by us, but we get guidance and input from the MSRC Advisory Board. And there's two main activities in this program. One is research, and the other one's what we call technology transfer, but it's really engagement and extension activities. So research is another one of these that's allocated through these requests for proposals process. Happens a little bit irregularly every 1 or 2 years, and there's been several cycles of funding now. Total of 36 projects have been funded over these several cycles. I think 25 of them are complete. The projects are done. There's 11 of them that are active right now. Many of those projects have supported graduate students, including some in the WRS program. So that's a way that students have been involved. As it happens, there's an RFP open right now. It was just issued last week, yeah. And the pre-proposals are due on November 10th. So if you as a graduate student are interested in this and you work with faculty who might share your interest, you can point them in this direction. And if you want to find out more, you can just easily find it on our website. Also, you may want to go there just if you're interested. It's a good library to find results on stormwater and or find people who worked in this area. And then the technology transfer activities. One is the Minnesota Stormwater Seminar Series. So if you're interested in this, they have a seminar every month, basically. I think it's 10 or 11 times a year, but almost every month. They bring in some really well-known stormwater experts from around the country. Have a big following, actually. A lot of people join by Zoom, and word has gotten out, so we have people joining from around the country and around the world sometimes for whatever reason. But also the PIs from the funded projects also present there. They've also created something called the Clean Sweep program. This is a good example of how the sort of pipeline from research to application. So there was a research project that studied how sweeping streets, hard to say, if you do it properly at least, can have a really, and do it at the right times of year and everything, get the leaf litter away, all that stuff, can have a really favorable impact on downstream water quality, mainly because you're taking phosphorus out that would otherwise go down into the storm sewers and through the into receiving water bodies. And based on that project, the extension educators in our center have worked on developing a program where they can train staff within cities on how to create a street sweeping program that would have beneficial water quality programs. It turns out there's lots of bottlenecks in that process. You need the right equipment. There's all kinds of things, permitting. So they help them work through that. So that's an example of how they see this cycle as research comes online and we get results, they can turn it into extension program. So next program I'll highlight is our on-site sewage treatment program. Again, on-site sewage treatment is yet another term for septic systems. They do research on a number of topics that are kind of related to this, but even go a bit beyond septic systems themselves. So, you know, how wastewater treatment affects water tables and temperatures, but also looking at contaminants of emerging concern, how it flows through wastewater, if it ends up being applied on land, how it affects the soil. That's one of sort of the emerging questions here. Wastewater properties from different treatment strategies and so on. Their outreach is mainly in the form of technical assistance. So they've been involved, for example, in designing a lot of the septic systems on University of Minnesota properties that are not in a centralized water treatment zone. But also they do it for MnDOT in some of their rest areas, for instance, various things like that. And then their main activity, at least budget-wise, is that by state law in Minnesota, if you want to become a septic system installer or a septic system inspector working for a county, you have to be certified by the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency, pass an exam and all that, get credentialed. What our program does is provide the training so you have the knowledge to pass those exams. And then there's some like post-certification credits that people also take. So that's kind of the core of it. Those are the scheduled workshops, but then they also offer additional kind of training for about septic systems, some to real estate professionals, some to homeowners, things like that. Okay, kind of coming full circle. Water Resources Research Act program still exists, and there's still federal funds flowing from USGS to these water resources research institutes. The money in the Water Resources Research Act program comes in two flavors, I guess you could say. One are what we call base funds, which support base or core functions within each center or institute. And there was the original appropriation for that, if you go back to look in the 1960s, was set at like $100 and some thousand per institute, which was a significant amount of money in the 1960s. It turns out that there's been basically no adjustment for inflation ever. So it's still right around about that same amount. And you know, $100,000 doesn't go as far as it used to, let's say. So we use it to support some of our, we're grateful for every dollar we have, and we do use it to support some of our base functions. And it also goes into partially support the Watershed Innovations Program, which has opportunities for grad students. The other flavor of funding is what are called national competitive grants. So here, this is a request for proposal process at the national level. So USGS issues these requests for proposals. And then the way the institutes are involved is the money. So we act as the agent for USGS within Minnesota. So all the applications for those funds pass through us and we submit them to USGS. And then if the funds are awarded, the money comes first to us and then distributed to the PIs. I will just say that we're probably running a little short on time. Okay. We've been really successful here in Minnesota with these projects, and a lot of them have funded graduate students, and we put in some of our center funding from CFANS to support that. So there again, some of you may or may not know you're funded through this mechanism. Watershed Innovations Program is another place where there's opportunities for students. Comes from CFANS funds, as well as WRA, as I mentioned. We support 3 different types of activities, all through RFP processes. Which ones we support in any given year depend on our available funding. The ones that are relevant, though, we do support graduate student research projects and have in the past, so that comes around sometimes. And we also support student professional development. Well, if you weren't here over the summer, you didn't see that request. But there will be another one coming up. So if you have any kind of a conference you want to go to, any kind of professional development activity, you can apply for those funds, and there will be another call for that coming out. Do I need to wrap up?
Yeah, you should probably 2 minutes.
Okay, good. I can do that. So other opportunities for you to know. One, you're already aware, probably, if you went last week. We have Water Resources Conference every year. It's a good opportunity, I think. Hopefully you found, if you went, to get a good overview of what's going on with water issues in Minnesota and learn some of the latest research. Also a good opportunity to present if you're a student, and we encourage that. It turns out next June, we're hosting a national conference sponsored jointly by NIWAR, which I mentioned, and UCOWR, stands for Universities Council on Water Resources. They have a joint annual Water Resources Conference every year. This year it's going to be in Minneapolis, right on our East Bank campus at the Graduate Hotel. So easy to get to. Could be an opportunity for you to present some research or just attend if you're interested. I think we'll have some funding available for that. You could apply through the Professional Development Fund. The call for abstracts for that will be coming out soon, due at the end of January. And you might be saying, okay, this is all great. Some of these opportunities might be worth looking into. How am I going to remember? How am I going to see announcements for this? Number one way you can do it is subscribe to our newsletter. Are you guys getting that?
I get it. Are you guys getting it?
Comes out every Wednesday, called Confluence. And we put all this stuff in there anytime we have an opportunity. But we also just look for other opportunities that might be of interest to our water community on campus. So other events, funding opportunities, calls for papers, and things like that. While you're at it, if you want to subscribe to Minigram, still exists. It comes out as an email newsletter these days. It's sent to a statewide audience, kind of highlighting some of the work going on here that we want to get out, folks to know about, including student work. All this stuff is also posted on our LinkedIn page. We're on social media too. We're on X and stuff. But I will say the one that we're emphasizing most and getting a lot of traction with lately is LinkedIn. And you may want to have a LinkedIn profile anyway. So find us there. A lot of this stuff is posted there. And then another thing you should know about, if you don't already, is the University of Minnesota Water Network. It's made up of multiple water programs all around the University of Minnesota system. So the Water Resources Center is an institutional member. NRI in Duluth is an institutional member. LLO up there is an institutional member. St. Anthony Falls. And in total, there's 200 and some people who are on. It's basically this really low risk. And all you do is you put in your name, you're on an email list, and a lot of this stuff will come out to the email list. So you should consider signing up for that, and a good way to be connected with other people who are interested too. So very good. That's all I have. There's some other ways to connect with us there. Maybe I ate up all the time with there's no time for questions, but
I don't know.
happy to take any.
I was gonna say, I think we could ask a few questions if there are some. Yeah, thanks, Jeff. And I was just gonna advertise more of the WINS grants. I know that WRS grad students have had them recently, the student level grants where I think it's like $10,000. And as a student, you apply for like a piece that you're adding onto a project. So a piece that you're designing, you can do the budget for it. It's a pretty neat opportunity.
Yeah, I hope we'll have budget for that going forward, because it has been, I think, a good opportunity for students. And the idea is that you probably have, it's meant for current graduate students. So you have projects that you're already working on, but you want to enhance it in some way. So
yeah,
it's good.
My question was, if that
No, Mason.
I was wondering with the extension, like the outreach aspects of the water center and the research aspects of the water center, how successful is the educational outreach, and do you find yourselves like keeping up with the research in like what you're able to communicate with the public, or is there like a consistent message that you have to keep hitting that kind of is lagging behind even? Does that make sense?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think there's probably two levels there. One is making sure that the people who are doing the extension education, our extension educators, are well versed in the latest research and have that knowledge. And actually, that was one of the rationales for bringing the that extension water team and housing it within the center, so that they're closely connected to the research going on in the center and they see what's happening. And I would say that has worked pretty well. I mean, one example I gave was in the stormwater program, where they're taking the results of, in this case, it's projects that we funded, but it could be any project, and keeping up on that and making sure that people know. The other layer is the audience that the extension educators are targeting. What is their level of science literacy, and how up to date are they? What's the gap between what they're doing and what the latest is? And that can be a challenge. It's very audience specific. We've got people working on where their primary audience is like agricultural producers. In the stormwater case, it's stormwater practitioners and communities. And I would say, I mean, as a career path, if you're at all interested, I think extension educators have a great job because they have a lot of flexibility. They identify the audience and the problem and have to be creative about ways of reaching them and getting that science across, and also staying up on the science. one of the challenges they often face is that if you put an extension program out there that assumes a certain amount of science literacy, the audience you'll attract are people who already are science literate, and maybe they would have found out that stuff anyway. I mean, the real challenge is to find people who don't know the stuff and need to know, and then how you reach them. That could be a challenge, but an interesting one.
Any question from this? Actually, some of the educators are WRS graduate. I can see the name.
Oh, yeah, some of the staff, some of the educators are WRS graduates.
They are. Oh, one of my favorite stories
Yeah.
is that Bailey Tangen, whose
Mhm.
face was up there, was actually a graduate student funded through one of these mechanisms I talked about on a soil
Mhm.
health project, and now is working for us. So makes me very happy.
Yeah. You guys know I wait for the uncomfortably long silence.
Hi Duluth, I can actually see you
I
now.
can see you now. Okay. Well, if there's no more questions, let's thank Jeff for giving us this great whirlwind overview. I think it really helps kind of like understand the center a lot more.
Thank you all. Talk to you.
Yep.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.